Alistair Sterling, a name that echoed with the cold, hard ring of currency, navigated the city not as a resident, but as a conqueror viewing his domain. From the hushed, climate-controlled interior of his custom Maybach, the world outside was a silent film of lesser lives moving in a rhythm he had long since abandoned for the brutal metronome of the stock market. His phone was pressed to his ear, his voice a low, precise instrument carving out the terms of another corporate annexation. He was not buying a company. He was acquiring a limb for his empire, and he felt nothing more than the dull satisfaction of a completed calculation. The deal was done. Another $100 million shifted on the global ledger, and Alistair felt the familiar, hollow emptiness that always followed victory. It was the silence after the storm, a void he constantly sought to fill with the next conquest, the next billion. Then the unthinkable happened. Traffic. A dead stop in the heart of the financial district, a clot in the city's artery that even his driver, a man paid to bend the laws of physics and municipal codes, could not bypass. A protest, the driver reported, his voice tight with apology. Alistair felt a flicker of irritation, a hot spark in the cold machinery of his mind. He did not have time for the common man's grievances. He had a board meeting, a press conference, a life calibrated to the second. Without a word, he pushed open the heavy car door and stepped out onto the pavement, the city's raw noise a sudden assault on his senses. Horns blared, people shouted. It was messy, chaotic, real? He hated it. He decided to walk the remaining blocks, his tailored Italian suit a shield of armor against the jostling crowds. His path took him past a city bus, wheezing at the curb as it disgorged and swallowed passengers. It was a vessel of a world he hadn't touched in 2 decades, a relic of a life he had purposefully and painfully excised. He glanced at it with detached disdain, and that was when he saw her. Through the smudged window, her profile was etched in fatigue. Her hair, once a wild cascade of auburn fire, was pulled back in a simple, severe bun. Her shoulders were slumped, not with the gentle weariness of a day's work, but with the bone-deep exhaustion of a life spent fighting a losing war. It was Ilara. Ilara Vance. The name was a ghost on his lips, a phantom pain in his chest. He felt the air leave his lungs. It couldn't be. The woman he knew was vibrant, a whirlwind of paint-stained fingers and laughter that could fill a cathedral. This woman was a pale echo worn thin by time and hardship. He almost convinced himself it was a mistake, a cruel trick of the light. But then he saw the boy sitting beside her. He was small, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with a serious expression and a mop of unruly dark hair. And around the boy's neck, hanging from a simple leather cord, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. The world tilted on its axis. Alistair's blood turned to ice. He had carved that bird. He had spent a week whittling it from a piece of driftwood on a windswept beach, his hands clumsy but earnest. He had given it to Ilara on their 1-year anniversary, a foolish, heartfelt token from a boy who had nothing else to offer but his love. It was his, and now it was around the neck of a child who had Ilara's mouth in. Alistair's eyes. The same intense, deep-set gray eyes that stared back at him from every mirror, every polished surface in his gilded cage. The boy looked out the window, his gaze sweeping past Alistair without recognition. The bus's hydraulic doors hissed shut, a final, definitive sound. As the vehicle groaned and pulled away from the curb, Ilara turned her head, her tired eyes briefly meeting Alistair's. There was no flicker of recognition, no sign that she saw anything more than another stranger in a suit. She was a single mom on a bus, and he was a ghost from a past she had either forgotten or buried. The bus disappeared around a corner, taking with it the only piece of his life that had ever felt real. Alistair stood frozen on the sidewalk, the noise of the city fading to a distant hum. The multi-million-dollar phone in his hand slipped from his grasp, hitting the concrete with a sharp crack that splintered the screen. He didn't notice. He was staring at the empty space where the bus had been, his entire world, an empire of steel and glass, collapsing into dust around the memory of a small wooden bird. He stumbled back to his car, ignoring the frantic questions of his driver. He did not go to the board meeting. He did not attend the press conference. He had his driver take him back to the silent, cavernous emptiness of his penthouse. A fortress in the sky that had suddenly become a prison. The sprawling view of the city, a testament to his power, now seemed to mock him. Every skyscraper was a monument to what he had chosen, and every distant light was a reminder of the life he had thrown away. He walked to a bar made of a single slab of obsidian and poured a measure of whiskey that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The liquid burned, but it couldn't touch the Arctic cold that had settled deep in his bones. In his study, a room lined with first editions he had never read, he unlocked a hidden safe behind a panel of mahogany. Inside, nestled amongst stock certificates and property deeds, was a simple, worn leather box. He hadn't opened it in 15 years. His fingers trembled as he lifted the lid. There she was. A photograph of a younger Alara, her face alight with a joy so pure it was painful to behold. Her arms were wrapped around a younger Alistair, a boy with hope in his eyes, a boy who hadn't yet learned to trade his soul for a kingdom. Beneath the photo were a few dried flowers and a stack of his letters returned to him unopened. The official story, the one his sister Genevieve had delivered with surgical precision and feigned sympathy, was that Alara had left him. She had taken money from their father, a man who saw her as nothing more than a common distraction, and disappeared without a word. She was a gold digger, Alistair, Genevieve had said, her voice soft and poisonous. She never loved you. She loved what you represented. He had been young, ambitious, and reeling from his father's ultimatum, Ilara or the Sterling Empire. In his grief and rage, he had believed the lie. He had allowed his heart to harden, pouring all his energy into becoming the ruthless tycoon his father had always wanted. Now, the image of the boy with his eyes and the wooden bird shattered that narrative completely. She hadn't left him. She had been pregnant. She had raised his son alone, in poverty, while he built monuments to his own ego. The whiskey tasted like ash in his mouth. He picked up his secure line, the one that bypassed all corporate channels, and called Marcus Thorne, his head of security. Marcus was a former intelligence officer, a man of absolute discretion and formidable capability. Marcus, Alistair's voice was hoarse. I need you to find someone. Her name is Alara Vance. She has a son about 7 or 8 years old. I have no address, nothing recent. I saw her on a city bus in the financial district an hour ago. I need everything you can find. I need it yesterday. Spare no expense. And Marcus, this does not exist. No one knows. No one inch. There was a pause on the other end, the first time Alistair had ever heard a hint of surprise from the stoic man. Understood, Mr. Sterling, Marcus replied, his tone all business once more. The next day, as Alistair moved through his corporate duties like an automaton, his sister Genevieve swept into his office. She was elegance personified, dressed in a sharp, white suit, her blonde hair coiffed perfectly. She was the public face of Sterling Global's philanthropy, a polished veneer hiding a core of cold ambition. Darling, she said, kissing him. You missed the gala planning committee yesterday. And you look dreadful. Still thinking about the acquisition? She ran a hand over a marble bust of their father. You need a wife, Alistair. Someone to ground you. I was just having lunch with Isabella Fairmont. Her family is practically royalty. The merger of Sterling and Fairmont would be a dynasty. Alistair looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time he saw the faint cracks in her perfect facade. He saw the possessiveness in her eyes, the way she spoke of his life as if it were a business asset to be managed. He thought of the lie she had told him all those years ago. I'm not interested in dynasties right now, Genevieve, he said, his voice flat. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't be foolish, brother. Legacy is everything. Later that evening, Marcus delivered a sleek, unmarked tablet to the penthouse. We found her, Mr. Sterling. Alistair's hands shook as he took it. The file was sparse. Alara Vance, age 39, employed as a cleaner for a commercial firm that serviced downtown office buildings. Lived in a tenement building in the industrial district, a place the city had all but forgotten. One son, Leo Vance, age 8. No father listed on the birth certificate. The report included a grainy photo of Alara leaving the apartment building, her face etched with a familiar weariness, and one of Leo playing in a concrete courtyard, his expression serious as he tried to fix a broken toy truck. But it was the last page of the report that made Alistair's blood run cold. It was Alara's address history. 15 years ago, after leaving her parents' home, she had moved into a small apartment building. Marcus had flagged it. Sir, he had written in the notes section. You should know the history of this property. Alistair's finger traced the address. He recognized it. A year after Alara had supposedly moved in, Sterling Global had bought the entire block for a redevelopment project. The building had been demolished. The project had been championed by his father at the behest of his ambitious young executive advisor at the time, Genevieve. They hadn't just tried to erase her from his life, they had tried to erase her from the face of the earth. The revelation hit him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a family disapproval. This was a calculated, cruel conspiracy. He stared out at the city, at the gleaming Sterling Tower that was the centerpiece of that very redevelopment project, and felt a surge of nauseating guilt. He hadn't just lost Alara, he had been a party to her destruction. The need to see her, to speak to her, became an agonizing, all-consuming fire. But how could he approach her? What could the billionaire who had, however unknowingly, signed the order to demolish her home possibly say to the struggling single mother she had become? He couldn't go as Alistair Sterling, the name synonymous with power and pain. He would have to find another way. He would have to enter her world, not as a king, but as a ghost. Alistair Sterling, the man who could move markets with a whisper, felt utterly powerless. He couldn't simply summon Alara to his office or write a check to assuage the chasm of guilt that had opened within him. Money was a vulgar weapon here, an insult to the life of struggle she had endured. He needed to see them, to understand the world his ignorance had condemned them to. He needed to do it without the armor of his wealth, without the name that was both his shield and his curse. He needed to be invisible. He had Marcus pull the schematics and public records for her apartment building. It was a relic of a bygone era, a place of crumbling brick and rusted fire escapes. The records listed a dozen code violations, including a perpetually broken main security door. That was his way in. The next morning, Alistair traded his $1,000 suit for a simple pair of worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, and a worker's jacket he had Marcus procure from a second-hand store. He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a man stripped of his identity. He called himself Alex. He drove a nondescript utility truck, another prop from Marcus's endless supply, and parked it a block away from the tenement. Walking toward the building, the air changed. The scent of exhaust and affluence from his part of town gave way to the smell of damp concrete and fried food. The sounds were different, too, the distant wail of sirens, the chatter of multiple languages, the laughter of children playing in the street with a burst soccer ball. It was a world teeming with a life he had never known. He found the broken front door, its lock shattered and hanging uselessly. He took out a set of tools and began to work, his hands, usually accustomed to signing documents or holding crystal glasses, now fumbling with wrenches and screwdrivers. He didn't have to wait long. She came down the stairs, a laundry basket balanced on her hip. She looked even more tired up close, with faint lines of worry etched around her eyes and mouth. She paused when she saw him. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cautious, wary of any new problem in a life already full of them. He kept his head down, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Landlord sent me to fix the door," he mumbled, his voice deliberately gruff, unrecognizable. "About time," she sighed, a small, bitter sound. "Thank you," she gave him a brief, impersonal nod and walked past, disappearing into the building's dingy laundry room. She hadn't recognized him. The relief was as sharp as the pain. He spent the day there, methodically disassembling and repairing the lock. It was simple work, but it focused his mind. It felt honest. He saw the residents coming and going, nodding at him with a mixture of suspicion and gratitude. He saw the poverty firsthand, the worn-out shoes, the thin coats, the constant worry in people's eyes. This was Alara's world. This was the world his son was growing up in. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on him, making it hard to breathe. He saw Leo come home from school, his backpack almost as big as he was. The boy stopped and watched him, his gray eyes, Alistair's eyes, filled with a solemn curiosity. "What are you doing?" Leo asked, his voice clear and direct. "Fixing the lock," Alistair replied, his own voice tight. "It's broken," Leo nodded sagely. "Everything in this building is broken." He sat down on the steps, pulling a small, battered notebook and a pencil from his bag. He began to draw, his concentration absolute. Alistair risked a glance. The boy was drawing a complex diagram of gears and levers. "What's that?" Alistair asked. "An idea," Leo said without looking up. "For a machine that can fix things automatically." Alistair felt a jolt of connection. As a boy, before the family business had consumed him, he had loved to take things apart, to see how they worked. He had filled notebooks with designs for impossible machines. It was a part of him he thought long dead, but here it was, alive and well in his son. He stayed until dusk, finishing the job just as Alara returned from the laundry room. She looked surprised to see him still there. "You're done?" she asked. "It works," he said, demonstrating the new, sturdy lock. She tested it and a faint smile touched her lips. It was the first hint of the girl he remembered. "Thank you," she said again, this time with genuine warmth. "Really? It's one less thing to worry about." He started finding other reasons to be there. A leaky pipe in the hallway, a flickering light on the third floor, a loose railing on the stairs. He became a fixture, the quiet handyman who worked for free. He never asked for anything, and slowly, the residents, including Alara, began to trust him. He learned their names, their stories. He learned that Alara worked a second job on weekends, cleaning offices just to make ends meet. He saw her come home late at night, her body aching with fatigue, and still find the energy to read Leo a story. He saw the love and fierce protection in her eyes every time she looked at her son. His bond with Leo grew tentatively. The boy was shy but brilliant. Alistair, as Alex, would bring him old, discarded electronics, a broken radio, a defunct toaster, and they would sit together on the steps of the building, taking them apart piece by piece. Alistair explained how circuits worked, how motors turned. Leo soaked it all up, his small hands surprisingly deft, his questions sharp and insightful. In those moments, Alistair felt a flicker of a joy so profound it almost brought him to his knees. It was pure, untainted by money or power. It was the joy of being a father. One afternoon, they were working on an old clock radio. Alistair was explaining the function of a capacitor when Leo suddenly went still. He put down the screwdriver and looked up at Alistair, his gaze unervingly direct. He tilted his head, his expression one of deep concentration, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had been bothering him for some time. Alistair felt a prickle of anxiety. "You know," Leo said, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "Your eyes are weird." Alistair's heart skipped a beat. "Weird? How so?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Leo leaned closer, peering into Alistair's face with an intensity that belied his age. "They're the same as mine," he stated, not as a question but as a fact. "When I look in the mirror, they look just like yours." The words hung in the air between them, simple, innocent, and utterly devastating. At that exact moment, the door to the apartment opened. Alara stood there, a bag of groceries in her arms. She had overheard her son's declaration. Her gaze flickered from Leo's face to Alistair's, from her son's gray eyes to the identical ones of the quiet handyman who had so mysteriously entered their lives. The cautious trust she had built for Alex crumbled in an instant, replaced by a dawning, horrified suspicion. The color drained from her face as she looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time, and the ghost of the man she had once loved began to emerge from the features of the stranger standing before her. The silence in the hallway was thick with unspoken history. Alara's hand, holding the grocery bag, trembled. The friendly, helpful handyman named Alex dissolved before her eyes, and in his place stood the specter of Alistair Sterling. The features were harder, the face leaner, the eyes shadowed with a gravity he hadn't possessed as a boy, but it was him. The recognition was a physical shock, a one-two punch of betrayal and fear. "Who are you?" she whispered, the question a fragile thread in the tense air. Before Alistair could formulate an answer, a sharp knock echoed from the newly repaired front door downstairs. A moment later, an elderly woman, their landlady Maria, called up the stairs. "Alara, there are people here for you. They say they're from the city. Child services." Panic, sharp and visceral, flared in Alara's eyes. She dropped the grocery bag, an apple rolling across the worn linoleum, and pushed past Alistair, her suspicion of him momentarily eclipsed by a more immediate terror. Alistair knew with a sickening certainty who was behind this. It was Genevieve. She had found them. While Alara dealt with the social workers who were making invasive inquiries based on a malicious and anonymous tip about an unsafe living environment, Alistair retreated. He couldn't be seen. He couldn't make things worse. He called Marcus, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. "She knows. My sister is making a move. I want to know how. I want to know everything she has done since the day I told you to find Alara. Dig deeper, Marcus. I don't care what it costs or what lines you have to cross. I want the proof. I want the weapon that ends this." The social services visit was a nightmare for Alara, a humiliating ordeal that left her shaken and terrified. Though they found no grounds for action, the threat lingered. It was a clear message: you are vulnerable. You can lose everything. When Alistair, as Alex, returned later that evening under the guise of checking a fuse box, Alara confronted him. "It was you," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You brought them here. You're Alistair Sterling, aren't you? What do you want? After all these years, you show up and try to take my son." "No, Alara. Never," he said, his voice raw with an honesty she hadn't heard from him in nearly 2 decades. I swear to you, I didn't know about Leo until a few days ago. And the people who called social services, that wasn't me. It was my sister. He saw the disbelief in her eyes, the wall of pain and mistrust she had built around herself. He couldn't blame her. He had no right to expect her trust. He needed an ally, someone who could vouch for him, someone Alara trusted implicitly. He found that person in Maria, the landlady. He approached her the next day not as Alex the handyman but as Alistair Sterling. He laid out the entire story in her small, cluttered apartment, the lies his family had told, his recent discovery of Leo, his sister's treachery, and his desperate, clumsy attempts to get close to his son. Maria, who had watched Alara struggle for years, who had been a grandmother to Leo, listened with shrewd, discerning eyes. She saw the wealth and power, but she also saw the profound guilt and desperation in his face. "She is a good woman," Maria said finally, her voice thick with a Spanish accent. "A proud woman. You broke her heart once. Money will not fix it. But that boy needs a father. And they both need protection from the wolves in your family." She agreed to speak to Alara on his behalf, to be the bridge across the chasm of mistrust. Meanwhile, Marcus's investigation began to bear fruit, uncovering the depth of Genevieve's conspiracy. It was more than just a lie told to a heartbroken young man. It was a calculated, multi-year campaign of suppression. Marcus found financial records buried deep in offshore accounts. A significant wire transfer from Genevieve's personal trust to a private medical clinic just days after Alara would have given birth. It was labeled discretionary medical services. It was hush money. But the next discovery was the true bombshell. Following the money trail from the clinic, Marcus unearthed a payment to a disreputable lawyer. This lawyer had drafted a non-disclosure agreement. He had approached Alara when she was at her most vulnerable, a new mother, alone and destitute after being forced out of her apartment by the Sterling demolition project. The document, signed under duress, forbade her from ever contacting Alistair or any member of the Sterling family in exchange for a paltry sum of money that barely covered her expenses for a few months. It was a trap designed to legally gag her while painting her as a gold digger if she ever tried to break it. Genevieve hadn't just lied, she had orchestrated a legal and financial cage around Alara and her son. Alistair stared at the digital copy of the agreement, at Alara's shaky signature at the bottom. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Genevieve hadn't just wanted to keep them apart, she wanted to ensure Alara could never fight back. She had used the family's immense legal power to crush a powerless young woman. The fight for his son was no longer just about making amends, it was about dismantling the corrupt legacy his family had built on lies and intimidation. The stakes were raised again, faster and more brutally than Alistair could have imagined. Genevieve, realizing from her own sources that Alistair was digging into the past and getting closer to Alara, made her most audacious move yet. A sleek, black car pulled up in front of Alara's building. A man in an expensive suit, a lawyer from the top firm on Sterling Global's payroll, approached Alara as she was returning from work. He didn't bother with threats, he made an offer. Maria, watching from her window, alerted Alistair immediately. He arrived just as the lawyer was finishing his speech. Alistair heard the final, chilling words. "My client is prepared to offer you $5 million, tax-free. A new life anywhere in the world you choose. All you have to do is sign this document and disappear with your son." The alternative, the lawyer added, his voice smooth as silk, is a custody battle you cannot possibly win. "We will prove you are an unfit mother. We will prove you extorted the Sterling family years ago. We will take your son. The choice is yours." The threat hung in the air, monstrous and absolute. Genevieve was no longer trying to hide the truth, she was trying to buy it, and if she couldn't buy it, she would destroy it along with Alara and Leo. The sterile, oppressive luxury of the Sterling Tower boardroom had never felt more suffocating. Alistair stood before the vast, polished mahogany table, the city sprawling beneath him like a conquered map. But he wasn't looking at the view. His eyes were fixed on the door. He had summoned Genevieve for an emergency board meeting, a pretense he knew she couldn't ignore. When she swept in, radiating confidence and condescending concern, she found the room empty except for him. "Alistair, what's the meaning of this? My schedule is airtight." "Cancel it," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. He gestured to the table. Upon its gleaming surface, he had laid out the evidence Marcus had gathered, a printed copy of the wire transfer from her trust to the medical clinic, a copy of the non-disclosure agreement she had forced on Alara, and a high-resolution satellite photo of the demolished apartment building. "I believe you have some explaining to do." Genevieve's smile faltered, but only for a second. She glanced at the documents, her expression hardening into one of cool disdain. So, you found your little charity case. I must say, I'm disappointed, Alistair. I thought you had better taste. Even then, she walked around the table, trailing a perfectly manicured finger along its edge. She didn't deny it. She embraced it. You destroyed her life, Alistair said, his voice low and shaking with a controlled fury. You paid her off, you threatened her, you buried her under legal documents. You let me believe she was a monster while the real monster was standing right next to me, patting my back. I did it for you, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. Her voice rose, echoing in the vast room. I did it for this family. For our legacy. She was nothing. A penniless artist who would have dragged you and the Sterling name into the mud. I saved you from her. I saved this company from your sentimentality. Father knew it too. He approved of every step I took. We were protecting our future from your weakness. Her justification was a venomous torrent of elitism and greed. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a chilling certainty that she had been right, that her cruelty had been a necessary act of preservation. That boy, Alistair's voice dropped to a whisper. That boy, Leo, he is my son. He is a Sterling. He is the legacy you were so desperate to protect. Genevieve laughed, a short, ugly sound. He is a mistake. An inconvenience that I was trying to clean up once again. That $5 million offer was generous. More than his mother deserved. That was the final blow. The utter dehumanization of Alara and their child. The cold, transactional view of a human life. In that moment, the last vestiges of brotherly affection Alistair might have harbored for her turned to ash. You are no longer a part of this family, Genevieve, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He pressed a button on his intercom. Marcus, please escort Miss Sterling from the premises. Her access to all Sterling global properties, accounts, and assets is terminated, effective immediately. Genevieve's face went white with shock, then purple with rage. You can't do this. I am a Sterling. This company is as much mine as it is yours. Security personnel entered the room. I am the majority shareholder, sister, Alistair said, his voice like ice. And you are a liability I am cutting loose. You are finished. As they led her away, screaming threats and insults. Alistair felt no triumph, only a profound, soul-crushing sadness for the family that had rotted from the inside out. His decision was made. There was no more hiding, no more half-measures. He had severed the cancerous limb of his old life. Now he had to earn his new one. He drove himself, not in the Maybach, but in the simple utility truck he had used as Alex, back to Alara's building. He found her in the small courtyard, watching Leo, who was trying to teach a stray cat to shake hands. Her posture was rigid, her face a mask of anxiety after the lawyer's visit. He walked up to her, holding a simple manila folder. Alara, he began, his voice stripped of all pretense. I know you have no reason to trust me. I know the man you remember is the reason you're in this position. But I am not that man anymore. Leo, he changed me before I even knew his name. He opened the folder and showed her everything. The proof of Genevieve's payments, the non-disclosure agreement, the internal memos about the demolition of her old building. He laid the entire ugly conspiracy bare. This was never your fault, he said, his eyes pleading with hers. You were the victim of a calculated, cruel plot by my family. They stole our life from us. They stole my son from me. I have cut my sister out of my life, out of my company. It's over. The threats are over. He paused, taking a deep breath, his next words the most important he would ever speak. I can't undo the past. I can't give you back the years we lost. But I can promise you this, from this moment on, I will spend the rest of my life protecting you and Leo. I will stand between you and anyone who tries to harm you. Let me be the father he deserves. Let me try to earn back the man I should have been. Alara listened, her expression unreadable. She looked from the documents in his hand to his face, searching his eyes for the truth. For years, she had carried the weight of shame and failure, believing Alistair had discarded her without a second thought. Now, the truth was laid out before her, a narrative not of her inadequacy, but of his family's corruption. She saw the raw guilt and desperate sincerity in his eyes. The wall she had so carefully constructed around her heart began to crumble, not in a flood of forgiveness, but with the slow, painful realization that the man she had loved might not have been the monster she believed him to be. She looked over at her son, so innocent and unaware of the storm raging around him. She knew she couldn't protect him from the Sterling machine alone. The lawyer's visit had made that terrifyingly clear. Taking a shaky breath, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Okay, Alistair, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Okay, we'll fight them. Together, it wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something far more precious at that moment, a declaration of alliance. The battle lines were drawn. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, a glittering affair where the wealthy and powerful gathered to publicly display their philanthropy. It was Genevieve's magnum opus. Though ousted from the company, she remained the chairwoman of the foundation, her last bastion of influence. The event was being held in the grand ballroom of a hotel that Sterling Global owned, a fact that gave Alastair a crucial advantage. This year's theme, chosen by Genevieve with breathtaking irony, was the power of family legacy. It was the perfect stage for the final act. Alastair arrived not with a supermodel on his arm, but with Marcus by his side. He moved through the crowd, nodding politely to business titans and political figures who were unaware of the storm about to break. He saw Genevieve on the main stage, basking in the glow of the spotlights, looking regal and untouchable. She was giving a saccharine speech about her father's vision and the importance of carrying on the Sterling name with integrity. The hypocrisy was so thick Alastair could taste it. He gave Marcus a subtle nod. It was time. As Genevieve paused for applause, Alastair walked calmly onto the stage. A murmur went through the crowd. The estranged siblings sharing a stage, it was a recipe for drama. Genevieve's smile froze, a mask of polite fury. Alastair, she said through clenched teeth, her voice dangerously low into the microphone. What a surprise. Have you come to make a donation? In a way, Alastair said, taking the secondary microphone from the lectern. His voice, amplified by the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system, was calm and clear. Good evening, everyone. My sister speaks of legacy. And I am here tonight to correct the record on what the Sterling legacy truly is. He turned to face Genevieve. For 15 years, my sister has been the keeper of a terrible family secret. A secret of cruelty, conspiracy, and extortion. Gasps rippled through the audience. Genevieve's face was a storm of rage. He's unwell, she said quickly into her mic. My brother has been under a great deal of stress. Security. But the hotel security reported to Alastair, and they remained motionless at the edges of the room. At that moment, the massive screen behind the stage, which had been displaying the foundation's logo, flickered to life. It was not a video Alastair had prepared. It was Marcus's final gambit. The screen showed a grainy, covertly recorded video. It was the lawyer Genevieve had hired to threaten Alara. But he wasn't talking to Alara. He was in a clandestine meeting with Marcus Thorne. The lawyer, having realized Genevieve was about to throw him under the bus, had decided to save himself. He was confessing everything. She had me threaten the mother, the lawyer said, his voice tinny but clear. She called the child a loose end. She told me to use the full weight of the Sterling legal team to crush them if they didn't accept the money and run. Then came the final, shocking twist, the piece of the puzzle even Alastair hadn't seen coming. The lawyer produced a second document. This is the part Mr. Sterling doesn't know, he said to Marcus's hidden camera. 15 years ago, Genevieve Sterling didn't just pay for Alara Vance's silence after the birth. She paid the clinic to falsify the records. There wasn't one child. There were two. Twins. A boy and a girl. Genevieve arranged for a private, illegal adoption for the girl, sending her to a family overseas. She told Alara the baby hadn't survived the birth. She only let her keep the boy because 2 missing babies were too much of a risk. She split them up to minimize the threat. A collective, horrified gasp swept the ballroom. Alastair felt the floor drop out from beneath him. A daughter. He had a daughter he never knew existed. He stared at Genevieve, whose face had crumbled into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. The exposure was absolute, her evil laid bare in a way that was more profound and monstrous than he had ever imagined. As the video ended, the doors to the ballroom burst open. Not hotel security, but city police officers moving with grim purpose towards the stage. Their presence had been arranged by the district attorney's office, armed with the lawyer's full, sworn testimony. They ascended the steps and placed Genevieve Sterling under arrest for a litany of charges, including conspiracy, extortion, and child trafficking. Her public downfall was swift, brutal, and complete. She was led away in handcuffs, her perfect world shattered before the very people she had sought to impress. In the stunned silence that followed, Alastair turned back to the microphone, his voice thick with emotion. My legacy is not in buildings or bank accounts, he said, his voice cracking. My true legacy was stolen from me. But tonight, I begin the work of reclaiming it. He looked toward the main entrance. The crowd turned as one to see Alara step into the ballroom holding Leo's hand. She was no longer dressed in her worn work clothes, but in a simple, elegant blue dress that brought out the fire in her hair. She looked not like a victim, but like a survivor, her dignity a shining beacon in the wreckage of the Sterling name. They walked through the parted crowd, a sea of shocked and humbled faces, and up onto the stage to join him. The flash of cameras which had once documented his corporate triumphs now captured a far more significant moment, the public reunion of a shattered family. Alistair knelt down, not as a billionaire CEO but as a broken man seeking forgiveness. He looked into his son's wide, gray eyes, identical to his own. "Leo," he said, his voice choked with tears. "I am your father. And I am so sorry. Can we please start over?" Leo looked at his mother, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. Then he looked back at Alistair, and for the first time, the boy's serious expression broke into a small, hesitant smile. He reached out and placed his small hand on Alistair's cheek. It was a beginning. 12 months later, the world of Alistair Sterling was unrecognizable. The steel and glass penthouse with its panoramic views of his former kingdom had been sold. The Maybach was gone, replaced by a sensible family SUV. Alistair now lived in a sprawling but comfortable house in the countryside, surrounded by green fields and ancient oak trees. The silence here wasn't the sterile hush of wealth, but the living quiet of nature, punctuated by the sound of a boy's laughter. He was in the backyard, wearing faded jeans and a simple cotton shirt, pushing Leo on a swing. The boy's legs kicked towards the sky, his delight a sound more valuable than any stock dividend. Alara sat on the porch steps, sketching in a charcoal pad, a contented smile on her face. The lines of exhaustion that had been etched so deeply into her features had softened, replaced by a serene glow. She was painting again, her studio a light-filled room in their new home. She watched the man who was once a ghost from her past become a constant, reassuring presence in her present. He made Leo breakfast every morning. He helped with his homework every night. He was patient, kind, and devoted in a way the younger, ambitious Alistair could never have been. He was not just a provider, he was a father. Alistair had undergone a profound transformation. The ruthless edge was gone, the cold calculation in his eyes replaced by a warm, gentle light. He had stepped down as CEO of Sterling Global, installing a trusted successor and retaining a non-executive role on the board. His focus had shifted entirely. Using the considerable funds from liquidating his more predatory assets and the fortune seized from Genevieve, he had established the Van Sterling Foundation. Its first and primary mission was to build safe, high-quality, and genuinely affordable housing for single-parent families. The inaugural project, the Alara House, was already under construction on the very city block where her old tenement had once been demolished by his own company. It was his first tangible act of atonement. The search for his daughter was ongoing, a quiet and painstaking process headed by Marcus. They had a lead, a family in Australia. Alistair approached it with patient hope rather than desperate urgency. He knew he had to heal his own soul and build a stable, loving home before he could bring another wounded child into it. He was learning that some things couldn't be rushed by power or money. He walked over and sat down on the steps next to Alara, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She leaned her head against him, the gesture easy and familiar. They had taken things slowly, rebuilding their trust day by day, but their love, buried for so long under pain and lies, had re-emerged deeper and stronger than before. It was a love forged not in youthful passion but in shared survival and mutual healing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out not a diamond ring but the small, worn wooden bird. He had had it placed on a simple, elegant silver chain. "I know we're already a family," he said softly, his voice full of a humility she never thought she'd hear from him. "But I want to spend the rest of my life making it official every single day. Alara Vance, will you build a new life with me?" She looked from the bird, the symbol of their beginning, to his face, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. Later that evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink across the fields, the three of them walked hand in hand back toward the warm, glowing lights of their home. Leo was in the middle, chattering happily about a design for a new, better kind of swing. Alistair looked at the woman he loved and the son he adored, his heart full to bursting with a contentment he had never known was possible. His father had taught him that a man's legacy was an empire built of steel and stone, something that would dominate the skyline. But as he held the hands of his family, Alistair Sterling finally understood the truth. A true legacy wasn't something you built for the world to see, it was the love you built within the quiet walls of your own home.